Because the hallucination is collaborative. That is the great Western illusion, the myth of the mastermind. We are obsessed with the idea of the CEO, the general, the central planner. We think order must be dictated from the top down, but look at the world. Look at a flock of birds turning in the sky. Look at a human brain. There is no master neuron in your head making the decisions. There is no central computer. Order does not come from the top down. It bubbles from the bottom up. It's called emergence. The components are dumb. The network is a genius. And once you understand how the network thinks, you realize you are not a solitary drop of water. You are a current in the ocean.
We are deeply conditioned to believe that structure requires a strict hierarchy. If a system is complex, we assume someone must be in charge of it. But nature rarely works this way. Consider the ant colony. An ant colony can build air-conditioned structures, wage wars, farm fungus, and manage waste disposal. It is an engineering marvel. If you asked a human to design it, they would draw an organizational chart. A manager giving orders to supervisors, who give orders to workers. But as Stephen Johnson explores in his work on emergence, no one is in charge of the ant colony. The queen is not a ruler, she is just a reproductive organ. She gives no orders. An individual ant is remarkably stupid. It cannot see the big picture. It simply follows a few basic chemical rules. If you smell this pheromone, follow it. If you bump into 5 other ants carrying food, switch tasks. Out of these simple, local, peer-to-peer interactions, global intelligence emerges. The intelligence is not in the ant. The intelligence is in the connections between the ants. More is different. When you put enough simple things together, the system wakes up. But how do isolated parts learn to move together without a conductor? For centuries, scientists observed fireflies in Southeast Asia, flashing in perfect rhythmic unison across miles of riverbank. Thousands of bugs, blinking exactly at the same millisecond. Biologists thought it was an optical illusion. It defied logic. How could they possibly coordinate? The answer lies in the mathematics of synchronization, detailed by mathematician Stephen Strugatz. There is no lead firefly. Instead, each firefly has an internal biological clock. When it sees a flash nearby, it adjusts its own clock just a tiny bit to match. At first, it's chaotic, but through continuous localized adjustments, a mathematical inevitability occurs. The random flashes lock into phase. Order pulls itself out of the noise. This spontaneous sync governs the universe. It is how the pacemaker cells in your heart know to beat together. It is how pendulum clocks on the same wall eventually swing in unison. Order is not imposed. Order is contagious. However, a system that is perfectly synchronized is rigid. A system that is completely random is useless. Where does life exist? Where does creativity happen? As researchers in complexity theory like Melanie Mitchell point out, life exists in a very specific, delicate mathematical zone. It is called the edge of chaos. Imagine water. When it is ice, it is perfectly ordered, but frozen and incapable of change. When it is steam, it is perfectly free, but chaotic and incapable of holding structure. Liquid water is the transition state. It is fluid enough to adapt, but structured enough to hold a wave. In chaos, James Gleick reveals that the universe is governed by nonlinear dynamics, where tiny changes can trigger massive consequences, known as the butterfly effect. Your brain operates exactly on this edge. If your neurons fire in perfect rigid sync, you aren't a genius. You are having an epileptic seizure. If they fire completely randomly, you are in a coma. Consciousness, culture, and life itself are a balancing act on the razor's edge between the frozen dictator of perfect order and the howling void of total entropy. So how do we balance on this edge? We build networks. But not all networks are created equal. For a long time, we thought systems like human society or the internet were random webs, like a highway system where every city has roughly the same number of roads. Physicist Albert Laszlo Barabasi discovered the truth. Real-world networks, from the neurons in your brain to the links on the internet, to the spread of a virus, to the actors in Hollywood, are what we call scale-free networks. They are dominated by hubs. Most nodes, people, websites, cells, have only a few connections, but a tiny number of nodes have millions. This structure is incredibly robust against random accidents. You can delete 80% of the random nodes on the internet, and the system still communicates, but it is incredibly vulnerable to targeted attacks. If you take out the hubs, the system fragments. You are a node in a scale-free network. Your ideas, your traumas, and your behaviors do not stop with you. They travel through the network, accelerating when they hit a hub, bouncing back to you through people you have never even met. We are literally wired together. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood concepts in psychology. Carl Jung realized that underneath our personal memories, there lies a deeper layer of the psyche shared by all humanity. He called it the collective unconscious. People often mistake this for mysticism or magic. It is not. It is network theory applied to human evolution. Just as your physical body inherited the shape of a spine and 2 lungs from millions of years of mammalian evolution, your mind inherited psychological structures. Jung called these structures archetypes. The hero, the shadow, the mother, the trickster. In the language of complexity, an archetype is a strange attractor. In chaos theory, a strange attractor is a mathematical pattern that a chaotic system naturally settles into over time. No matter where human beings are born, in ancient Mesopotamia or modern Manhattan, our neurological networks inevitably settle into the same psychological patterns. We dream the same monsters. We tell the same myths. Not because we spoke to each other, but because the hardware of our minds naturally gravitates toward the same strange attractors. The collective unconscious is the emergent software of the human species. If the collective unconscious is the software of our species, how does that software actually process information in real time? To understand this, we must look at what technology visionary Kevin Kelly calls the hive mind. When a bee swarm needs to find a new home, they do not vote, and the queen does not dictate the location. Instead, scout bees explore in all directions. When a scout finds a good spot, she returns and performs a waggle dance. The better the location, the more enthusiastically she dances. Other bees observe, get excited, and go check it out themselves. If they agree, they dance too. It is a system of parallel processing. The swarm acts as a single distributed brain. As Kelly notes in Out of Control, this is how all truly resilient systems operate. A hive mind has no center of command, which means it has no single point of failure. You can kill 20% of the bees, and the swarm still makes the right decision. Human markets, democracies, and the internet are hive minds. When you buy a cup of coffee, you are casting a tiny vote in a massive global waggle dance, signaling to the supply chain what is valuable. The intelligence is not in any one human. It is in the space between us. But how does a signal, a rumor, a virus, or a new technology travel through the human hive so quickly? You might think that in a world of 8 billion people, You are entirely disconnected from someone in a remote village halfway across the globe. Sociologist Duncan Watts, in his work on small worlds, proved mathematically that this isolation is an illusion. Because we live in scale-free networks with massive hubs, the path between any two nodes is shockingly short. This is the famous concept of 6 degrees of separation. You know a friend who knows a business owner, who knows a politician, who knows a diplomat, who knows the leader of a foreign nation. You are mathematically only a handful of handshakes away from every human being alive. This explains why panics, financial crashes, and viral ideas explode seemingly out of nowhere. We are densely packed into a small world network. When one node catches fire, the sparks do not just travel locally, they jump across the hubs, igniting the whole world in days. If everything is so tightly connected and volatile, why doesn't the system constantly explode? How does it maintain stability without a dictator pulling the brakes? The answer was formalized by mathematician Norbert Wiener in the mid-20th century. He called it cybernetics. Wiener discovered that complex systems regulate themselves through feedback loops. Think of a thermostat. It is a dumb machine, but it has a negative feedback loop. When the room gets too hot, it turns on the AC. When it gets too cold, it turns on the heat. Our bodies run on thousands of these loops. When your blood sugar drops, you feel hunger. When you eat, the hunger stops. Nature does not need a planner because nature uses feedback. The economy uses prices as feedback. Ecosystems use predator-prey populations as feedback. When we try to artificially control a system from the top down, we often sever these feedback loops. And when feedback is destroyed, the system goes blind, and collapse is inevitable. Because we ignore feedback loops, we constantly try to solve problems the wrong way. Environmental scientist Donella Meadows famously urged us to start thinking in systems. If there is a drug epidemic in a city, the mastermind approach is to arrest all the dealers. But Meadows points out that this is linear thinking. In a complex system, arresting dealers reduces the supply of drugs, but the demand remains the same. So the price of drugs skyrockets. Because the price skyrockets, addiction becomes more expensive, leading to more crime. And the high profit margins attract even more ruthless cartels. By trying to force the system, you produce the exact opposite of your goal. This is called policy resistance. To truly change a system, you cannot attack its parts. You must change the rules of the network, the goals of the system, or the flow of its information. Even with perfect feedback, systems are never perfectly safe. Complexity scientist Melanie Mitchell explores a phenomenon known as self-organized criticality. Imagine dropping grains of sand one by one onto a table. Slowly, they form a pile. As the pile grows steeper, it reaches a critical state. Now, dropping just one more grain of sand could do nothing, or it could trigger a massive avalanche that collapses the whole pile. The size of the avalanche is entirely unpredictable. Forest fires, stock market crashes, and political revolutions operate exactly like this sand pile. They naturally build themselves up to the edge of disaster. The spark that starts the revolution is not special. It is just the grain of sand that happened to land at the critical moment. Collapse is not a failure of the system. Collapse is an emergent property built into the system. This bottom-up, unpredictable process is the true engine of history. As Matt Ridley argues in The Evolution of Everything, we must abandon the idea that history is driven by great generals, visionary inventors, or divine plans. Language was not invented by a committee of grammarians. It emerged from millions of peasants communicating. The internet was not planned by a CEO. It evolved protocol by protocol. Even morality was not handed down from a mountain. It evolved as a set of rules to allow primates to cooperate without killing each other. Evolution is the ultimate blind watchmaker. It has no goal. It has no foresight. It simply tests what works right now and discards what doesn't. Everything beautiful, functional, and enduring in our world was not designed. It evolved. If human culture evolves like biology, does it obey the same laws? Physicist Geoffrey West sought to answer this by analyzing the ultimate human hive, the city. West found that cities scale mathematically, just like biological organisms. When a mammal doubles in size, its metabolism slows down. It requires 25% less energy per cell. It becomes more efficient. Cities do the exact same thing. When a city doubles in size, it needs 15% fewer gas stations, 15% fewer roads per capita. But here is where human emergence becomes terrifying. Unlike animals, cities exhibit superlinear scaling. When a city doubles in size, wealth, innovation, and patents increase by 15%. But so do crime, disease, and pollution. To prevent collapse from this accelerating growth, cities must constantly invent new paradigms, from the Industrial Revolution to the digital age. We are caught in an emergent treadmill that is speeding up. We have looked at cities, ants, and the internet. But what about the mastermind you feel most intimately? The you inside your head? Philosopher Daniel Dennett argues in Consciousness, explain that the ego is the ultimate illusion of central control. You feel like there is a single you sitting in a theater in your brain, watching the screen of your eyes, pulling the levers of your body. But neurobiologically, there is no theater. There is no central command. Your brain is a massive democracy of specialized modules. One part recognizes faces, another part processes syntax, another part manages fear. These modules compete for attention. The one that wins the competition becomes your conscious thought for that millisecond. Consciousness is not the CEO of the mind. It is simply the press secretary explaining to the world what the hive has already decided to do. To prove how complex things arise from mindless simplicity, mathematicians created simulations called cellular automata. The most famous is John Conway's Game of Life. It is a simple grid of pixels. There are only 3 rules. If a pixel has too few neighbors, it dies of loneliness. If it has too many, it dies of overpopulation. If it has exactly the right amount, it reproduces. From these 3 impossibly simple rules, no one expected much. But when you run the simulation, something miraculous happens. The pixels form pulsing shapes. They form gliders that fly across the screen. They form factories that build other shapes. As Stephen Wolfram showed in his research, simple rules inevitably produce infinite, unpredictable complexity. You do not need a complex code to build a complex universe. You only need simple rules and enough time for them to interact. If everything is just mindless rules interacting, if there is no CEO in the brain, no planner in the city, and no mastermind in the universe, is life just a random, chaotic machine? No. Because while the rules are blind, the results are deeply meaningful. As Jordan Peterson outlines in Maps of Meaning, we survive the chaos of this emergent world by generating meaning. Meaning is the instinctual realization that you are properly positioned on the edge of chaos. It is the feeling of the network operating correctly. When you feel a deep sense of purpose, it is not an illusion. It is your nervous system, evolved over billions of years, signaling that you are acting as a proper, functional node in the human network. You are connecting the order of the known past with the chaos of the unknown future. We spend our lives agonizing over our individuality. We defend our egos, as we saw in the last episode. We feel isolated in the dark rooms of our skulls. But the physics of emergence tells us a profoundly comforting truth. You are not a solitary mastermind trying to force the universe into submission. You are a local interaction. Every time you speak, every time you act, you are sending a signal into the network. You are the firefly adjusting its flash. You are the ant leaving a trail. You cannot control the entire system. The myth of the mastermind is a lie. But because the system is deeply connected, your local actions ripple out to shape the global structure. You do not need to be the CEO of reality to change it. You just need to interact with the nodes immediately around you with intention, clarity, and courage. In isolation, you are just a spark, but connected, you are the mind of the world waking up.